8.1 and 8.3 talked about multiples of fractions and multiplying a whole number times a fraction. Let's take a look at 8.1 first, which talked about unit fractions and finding the multiples of unit fractions. Okay, here we have a fraction, and we know that this is a unit fraction because there's a 1 in the numerator. We're going to be asked to find the next 4 multiples of this unit fraction. Now, we've talked about multiples before. Multiples are like skip counting. So if you had the multiples of 2, you would skip count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. Multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20. In this case, we're just talking about multiples of 1. So we're going to skip count by 1, which really just means we're going to count up. Okay? When we're talking about fractions, all we're worrying about is our numerator. That's all that's going to change. Our denominator in this case, when we're finding our multiples, is going to stay the same. So I could write my denominator in for my next 4 multiples and not even worry about my numerator. After I'm done with that, I take a look at my numerator. I'm starting with 1, and to find my multiples, I skip count. But because I'm talking about 1, I just count up by 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Super simple. That's all I'm doing here. Now, you might have a question that says, you have 3/4 cup of sugar. 3/4 cup of sugar. And you need to bake 3 loaves of bread with 3/4 cup of sugar. How many fourth a cup do each loaf of bread get? Well, this is a really complicated question that's really not that complicated. I want to know how many 1/4 are in 3/4. In order to do that, I'm going to take 3/4 and I'm going to write it as the product of a whole number times a unit fraction. Basically, I want to pull that 1/4 off to the side so I know how many of them I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my numerator, and that's going to become my whole number, and I'm going to multiply it times my unit fraction. My unit fraction has a 4 in my denominator, and because it's a unit fraction, it has a 1 in the numerator. So if I were answering this question and saying, okay, I have 3/4 cup of sugar that's making 3 loaves of bread, how many fourth a cup is going to make 1 loaf of bread? Well, here's my 3 loaves. 3/4 makes 3 loaves, so 1/4 is going to make 1 loaf of bread. That would be my answer, 1/4. I wanted to know what my unit fraction was. Okay, let's take a look at our next problem. In 8.2, we talked about finding the multiples of just a regular fraction. So here we have 2/3. I'm going to write my multiples for 2/3, 4 of them. I'm finding my multiple of 2, but my denominator is going to stay the same. So again, same thing with this. I can write those denominators in right away, and now all I have to do is take a look at the numerator. Multiples is like skip counting, so I'm going to skip count by 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. Now, here's a similar problem that we might have to solve, that this part is going to come in handy. Let's say you're doing an experiment in your class, and you have 4 people that are sitting at your table. 4 people. And each of you are going to have to get 3/5 a teaspoon of salt. Your teacher might want to know how many 1/5 teaspoons scoops you need in order to get enough salt for your whole table. I want to know how many 1/5 I need for my whole table. Well, in order to do that, the first thing that I have to do is I have to multiply. I have 4 people, and each person needs 3/5. Okay. I'm going to take my whole number and multiply it times my numerator. 4 times 3 is 12. My denominator is going to stay the same. Now, I want to take this fraction, 5/12, and write it as the product of a whole number times a unit fraction so that I can figure out how many 1/5 I need. All I do is take my numerator, and it becomes my whole number, and I multiply it times my unit fraction. My unit fraction has a denominator of 5, because over here my denominator is 5, and because it's a unit fraction, it has a 1 in the numerator. This would be my answer as the product, multiplication, of a whole number times the unit fraction. 12 times 1/5 would equal 12/5. Okay, one more problem like this. Again, finding my multiples of my fractions, super simple. I'm just skip counting. My denominator stays the same. And I'm going to skip count for my numerator. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. That's it. If I wanted to turn 12/5, let's say, into the product of a whole number times a unit fraction, again, I pull out my numerator, it becomes my whole number, and I multiply times my unit fraction. My denominator is 5, and because it's a unit fraction, it has a 1 in the numerator. Super simple. Okay, now, 8.3 was multiplying a whole number times a fraction, which is really what we just did in 8.2. So 8.3, again, super simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my whole number and multiply it times my numerator, and my denominator stays the same. Here I'm going to do the same thing. Take my whole number, multiply it times my numerator. My denominator stays the same. Not much to it. We'll do one more. So here I do the same thing. I just multiply my whole number. Oops, sorry, that was really bad. Multiply my whole number times my numerator. 6 times 3 is 18, and my 4 stays the same. Simple, done, nothing to it. Okay, I'm going to make another video that talks about 8.4, which is definitely more complicated. It's the most difficult one out of all of these lessons. We're not only going to multiply a whole number times a fraction, but we're going to multiply a whole number times a mixed number. And through that process, we have to take our mixed number, convert it into a fraction, multiply, and then convert that now improper fraction back into a mixed number. So take a look at that video, and I'll talk to you later.